And thanks to all of you for being with us today. We're really excited to share some of the transformative work that has been done by children's museums over the past year, in particular, to support children and families through play in innovative ways. I want to start our presentation today by talking about some of the larger framing of what's been happening in the children's museum field. And then we will hear three exemplars from our esteemed panel. Kathy Parham, who's the executive director of the Children's Playhouse in Boone, North Carolina. Deb Gilpin, president and CEO of the Madison Children's Museum in Wisconsin. And Dene Mosier, executive director of the Kansas Children's Discovery Center in Topeka, Kansas. I think during this session, you all will be as inspired as I am every day in my work as the world's cheerleader for children's museums. And we hope that you will find some inspiration as well as some confirmation of the importance of play and some ideas for creatively reaching out to those families most in need of play. And so with that, let me start with some of the framing about the work that we've been doing at the association level to capture and support our members over this past year through the pandemic. Starting in late 2020, of course, as the association, our job is to support and champion the work of children's museums worldwide. And that work came into very clear focus as the pandemic became named a pandemic. If you can remember, way back in March, at least in the United States, March of 2020. And to give you some scope of the impact of the pandemic on our community, in the United States, ACM counts nearly 200 children's open and operating children's museums in our membership. And by March 30th of 2020, all domestic children's museums had closed their doors to physical visits. And as you can imagine, the first months of the pandemic in our community were focused on how long is this going to last? Remember, there was a time that we thought it would be 2 weeks. We thought this would be 2 weeks, maybe 6 weeks. And what would we do in 6 weeks when we reopened? The reality started to sink in very, very quickly that access to our physical facilities would be significantly lessened and under strictures for a long period of time. And that really pushed our community to think about how to continue to be of service to the children and families that they are so dedicated to, serving nearly 40 million visitors annually as a collective. How are we going to continue to be of service when one significant part of our functioning is being taken away from us? And of course, children's museums delivered. And so in late 2020, about 6 months into our pandemic experience at the association, we started to see some really incredible trends and innovations, which inspired us to launch our Museums Mobilize initiative to take an inventory and census of these innovative activities so that they don't get lost, as now that we are on the waning end, hopefully, of the pandemic, that we remember and hold on to these innovations, as well as document the power and impact of children's museums. And so a main framework, and you'll see how this runs through the inspirational stories you'll hear from our panelists later in our session. While most folk think about children's museums as the place, what we know in this community is that children's museums are much more than their building. While their building as local destinations obviously is a significant part of their operation and how they deliver services, all children's museums function across at least 4 dimensions of operations. They also serve as educational laboratories, testing and innovating new child-centered and play-centered pedagogies that can be inspirational and instructional for other learning environments. They serve as community resources. They are sources of expertise, on early childhood, on playful learning, on child-centered learning and design. And they also serve as advocates for children. You will also find children's museums and representatives from children's museums at the table at the local levels on policy conversations in collective impact efforts to improve the lives of children and families in their communities. And over this past year, we saw our members really dig deep into how to leverage their expertise across these 4 dimensions, again, to continue to serve children and families, particularly through play, in a completely different landscape and environment. So a little bit about what we've captured overall from our museum's Mobilize initiative to date. We count 195 programs that are new and innovative programs from across our membership so far. And we've really identified some specific areas and ways that children's museums have been leveraging their work. Have they been innovative ways to leverage their people and adaptation of their programs? Are they lending themselves out again as community experts? And some really interesting uses of their facilities. So what is a museum if we can use that space in a different way? You can see that these new programs have been focused on a diversity of audience, particularly with children and families that were most affected by the pandemic, like families of first responders, children in Title I schools, English language learners, and children with special needs. And we're going to hear about some of those innovative efforts again today in our session. And of course, you'll hear again that so many of these innovations we see have been driven by really deep and long-lasting partnerships and relationships that children's museums build, which of course make them such key community resources and trusted community resources when in a time of crisis can be called upon or can call on other community partners to really jump to service in a flexible and meaningful way. And so with that, I'd like to introduce and welcome our first panelist today, Deb Gilpin, President and CEO of the Madison Children's Museum, to share with us their extraordinary community play effort during the pandemic. Deb?
Thank you so much, Laura. I am so happy to be here. I, of course, love being with other people who like to play and believe in play. So it's a great honor for me to participate in this. I want to orient you to our region a little bit. The Madison Children's Museum is in Madison, Wisconsin, a metro region of about 670,000 people. We are right downtown near the state capitol. Our museum exists on Ho-Chunk land. This is a place their nation has called Dejop for millennia. The museum recognizes and respects the inherent sovereignty of the Ho-Chunk Nation, along with other First Nations in this country. I invite you to honor your site by telling us in the chat where you are today. Madison is frequently named in all the highest quality of life measures like parks and bike paths, business, university, safety, and healthcare. And sadly, these measures are often based on data about the white people of our area and do not represent the quality of life for our full population. Next slide. August 2020 was the 40th anniversary of the museum, having served 3.4 million visitors and typically landing in the top dozen in the children's museum world. We had secured funding for MCM Roadshow, our plan to hit the road and take hands-on, physically collaborative exhibits to every neighborhood and festival we could find. When playgrounds were closed for playing together, we seemed to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Next slide. So instead, we fanned out into the neighborhoods. The remaining 20 of our 74 staff designed a way to invite our own employees and volunteers to bring activity into their own neighborhoods. We supplemented them with artists in those neighborhoods where we had gaps, and the city funded the participation of those artists. We worked with multiple city permit divisions, all of whom were struggling with their own issues in their city and furloughs and all the things we also were. And we learned the rules of engagement. We created a rule book for all staff and their participation, helping them find comfort or allowing them the freedom, if they didn't have comfort, to not participate. Being downtown in a capital city, we know how to work with the city and their rules. We know who to talk to get things done, but it really was very tumultuous. Next slide. So when we secured a PPP that allowed us to bring back 40 employees for 8 weeks, each person with their own family or pod took a 5-gallon bucket of chalk paint, approved brands and colors, a handbook of 40 international hopscotch games, and went to the approved sites. They couldn't go to dead ends where people would congregate. They had to be 10 foot from a curb cut, and many, many other rules came into play. But it was an amazing and joyful experience, and really brought every neighborhood in to participate in what would have been being part of our museum on a live site. Next slide. So did I say that we were scheduled to launch this on Monday, June 8th, 2020? Does anyone remember what that day would have been like? Our streets near the museum were broken glass and burning dumpsters. Can you imagine what it would have been like to be a person out spray painting on a sidewalk that day, or to see someone on your own sidewalk spray painting? So we postponed. And a month later, in the very last 2 weeks of our PPP, staff and artists masked up, fanned out, and as individuals and pairs transformed underused pavement with artful games that support math, literacy, cultural literacy, and physical activity. We ended up producing 350 sidewalk surprises in 5 languages across dozens of neighborhoods. We have a beautiful outdoor rooftop ramble. We know outside space is healing and inspiring. I could fill this whole slide deck with research citations, but you are the experts. You've seen it. The effects of isolation and screen time, saturation on our kids. So as winter was coming around in Wisconsin, we knew we couldn't sit on our hands and stop being part of our community. Next slide. So we went on to test and prototype outdoor STEM activities. Well, let's go on to the next one. We went on to prototype outdoor activities for families. On the Capitol lawn, we laid out challenge courses. We tested all different materials where kids didn't need to touch them. This was before that research was back in about touching things, about the virus transmission. And we carefully invited our most at-risk children and families, especially the downtown families, to come and use these materials. And we spent time with them connecting and getting them out of their apartments and getting them into places where they could see each other and have some healthy social interaction and be safe. And in the dead of winter, we purchased kids cross-country skis, and we offered 16 parent-child cross-country ski classes from toddler to 10-year-olds. We had 70 participants in that program. All of these programs will become permanent activities of the museum. It's clear that they were really important. Now, I want to mention that as statewide funding opportunities have been opening up in our state, we've made a couple of proposals, and our school district offered funds to redesign our classrooms and schools. And we made a pitch, and the district grantors were reporting that 38% of the proposals they received were for outdoor learning spaces and playground improvements. Really the recognition that kids need to get outside. Our project was called Recess Revolution, and we continue to seek funding to do that as schools reopen next fall. So I want to note that we did open our museum last week, Thursday. Yay, it's been an amazing 4 days of being open. One thing we've observed are that families are absolutely joyful and happy to be there, and children are showing quite a bit of hesitancy. They are taking less physical risks. They're staying closer to their caregiver, and they're limiting their social engagement with other children. It's a really interesting phenomenon, and we're going to be watching this very closely to see how long sort of the catch-up might take for children to return to what we all see as normal social behavior. But it's wonderful to be open. So I want to just you can go to the last slide. So in the end, the way we feel about it is Madison Children's Museum is in the right place at the right time, and our future, as always, is in play. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deb. Thank you for that inspirational introduction to our panel. And I do want to remind all the folks online that if you have questions or comments, please feel free to put them in the chat. We'll be looking at them through the session. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Kathy Parham, who is the Executive Director of the Children's Playhouse in Boone, North Carolina, to share with us the work that they've done around their Playhouse play kits during the pandemic. Kathy?
Thank you. So to give you a little bit of background about where we are and our context, we couldn't be more different, I think, than where Deb is. So we are located in the Appalachian Mountains of Western North Carolina. Our county is small. It is just over 56,000 people. We have quite a bit of extremes of rich and poor in our county. On one hand, we are a tourist destination because of the beauty of the mountains, and we have a large university just blocks away from the Children's Playhouse, Appalachian State. On the other, there is still quite a bit of poverty in our community. The child population in Watauga County is 7,000 children as of 2018, and about 2,000 of those are under age 5. According to the 2018 North Carolina data card, 6% of Watauga children live in low-income homes, and about 25% have food insecurity. But again, given the domination of our local economy by tourism and Appalachian State University, which went online in March 2020, those numbers of poverty numbers probably greatly increased during the pandemic. And what we heard from the users of our Play Kit project, there were quite a few that had disruptions in their income and even food insecurity. So in the early days of the pandemic, when we closed in March 14th, 2020, we quickly went from a staff of 3 full-time people and 8 part-timers to just 2 people, myself and my finance director. When the pandemic started, we thought, oh, well, we can try to offer online activities, but we quickly realized that we were too late to the game and too small to try to compete in that way. And when we reached out to our families, we learned that they weren't really interested in a lot of online programming. Because of our topography, sometimes internet can be spotty in different hollers, and then some people simply couldn't afford the internet. When we surveyed our scholarship members, we give away about 25% of our members get free memberships based on low income. We heard back from people that didn't have access to the internet. One mother wrote me, "Thank you for your reply, but I don't have good Wi-Fi connection. I appreciate you, but we have no luck. We still have car insurance and car payment, prepaid phone bills. We can't catch a break. I'm using my mother-in-law's Wi-Fi as we speak. Sorry to bother you. I appreciate your tips. We may use them when we have Wi-Fi." So we realized quickly that that wasn't for us. We were going to need to do something hands-on, and that was much more in our wheelhouse and comfort level. Next slide, please. So because I had been participating in the weekly calls with the ACM, I knew about some things that other museums were trying, and I heard about, I think on the West Coast, a museum in Washington State, I believe, that was doing busy boxes. So we came up with the idea of doing play kits, and these are the goals that we started out with. When I say that we wanted to mitigate the trauma of the pandemic, the isolation and anxiety the pandemic caused, really, as we extended this project for almost a year, we learned that it was not just the family's trauma and isolation and depression and anxiety that we were helping, we were also helping our own. Again, as I mentioned, we were down to really just one program staff member, myself, And so I had to draw deeply on our board. We were lucky to have a great board with several people with early childhood expertise. And Jana Duke, somebody who's in the audience today, is a retired special education teacher and early interventionist, became a very key volunteer that helped a lot with planning our play kits. I was also lucky that my daughter, who had been 18 months old when the Playhouse first was founded, is now 20 years old and was doing her sophomore year from home via the internet because of the pandemic. So since we were quarantining together, we could work together, go into the Playhouse every day and pack our play kits. So really what I found that more than anything else, the Play Kit Project was an effort to battle isolation anxiety with imagination and empathy rooted in play. Imagination and empathy are the fruits of play. And we often felt like we were playing as being play kit creators. We had never done anything like this. It was a total brand new pivot. It's okay to go to the next slide. So we felt like we really had to sort of draw on that, like, let's pretend we're a company that makes play kits, and sort of that fruit of that playfulness gave us the courage to make that step. So this slide shows you the different types of kits that we created. In all, we created 14 different kits. We did 7 play kits for ages 2 to 6-year-olds, and 6 STEAM kits for ages 6 and up, and 1 infant toddler kit. And each kit contained about 6 to 12 activities and enough supplies for about 2 children. So they were used. Some families, just had 1 child, but we also heard from families with 4 children that all found something to entertain them in the play kits. And so we were constantly, when we were imagining and empathizing about what the families must be going through, what would they need right now? So in the early spring, we had an outdoor kit. In the summer, we had a water kit. And we kept that age range also in mind. And as I said, we were so lucky to have such wonderful volunteers. And again, many of our key volunteers were grandparents who were missing their grandchildren, couldn't be with them or could only see them outside. And they poured that love and energy into this project. Next slide, please. So this shows you just a little example of the kinds of activities that we had. And this was from our last kit, our Snowy Days kit. So that video was created by my daughter and I, and we were definitely playing the day we made that video. Next slide, please. We also, I think maybe something's starting on YouTube, maybe if you close YouTube. Although it'd be good to know how to do a DIY bird fountain. We also had to reach out to our community and build new partnerships to make this project a success. So we collaborated with 19 other agencies to help distribute our kits. Those included our Hunger Coalition, their early intervention program, the local schools. They were tearing their hair out how to do services for kids with autism and speech delays. Kids in the western end of our county who we often don't serve through the Head Start program. So we felt like that we were reaching families maybe that we had never reached before through these partnerships. Also, there's a group that supports grandparents that are having to be foster parents. It's another group, but anyway, it was 19 others. The Immigrant Justice Committee helped us get our activity guides translated every month, and our local Feed All Regardless of Means cafe helped provide foods, ingredients, and recipes so that we, in about half of our kits, we were able to have that, address that food insecurity piece. We also added a social justice component to each kit, and a local Black activist, Tiffany Christian, who's also a PhD in social work and a minister, just actress, all around person. She added, helped write social justice and empathy activities for each of our kits. Next slide, please. In all, we assembled a total of 1,650 kits, and as of March, we had distributed 1,528 kits. So we still have some left and are kind of holding those in reserve at this point. In March, we had to pivot to renovating our building, and we are aiming at reopening in July. So 65% of the kits were distributed free of charge to families in financial distress. They picked them up, they requested them on our website and picked them up on our porch. And then we also, the agencies I mentioned before, specifically served low-income disadvantaged families. About 35 of the families did make a donation for the materials cost of the kit, and often would, and those range from $10 to $25. Often they would, some families would give in excess of the suggested donation in order to support our giving them away free to other families. So the materials cost of the project were mainly covered by that 35% that were making those donations. However, the real expense of the kit was my time and the remaining staff that we had, and that was thankfully covered by a donation from a community foundation. We had about 3 grants, but we had one big one that really helped us. Next slide, please. So I'll just close with what it meant to families. And this is what you see is a screenshot of a message from a mom. She's a single mother. She wrote me many times. She requested every single kit we made. And she works part-time as a waitress, but was experiencing reduced income because of the pandemic early on, and then was working crazy hours when things picked up again. She told me on another occasion that she has a teen son who is autistic, and then she has a daughter that was just a toddler when the pandemic began. And she was so grateful to have something that actually her autistic teenager and her 2-year-old could enjoy. And then she wrote me this particular message about playing with these tubes, these wool balls. We dyed them ourselves. And then these are little mailing tubes that we sourced from a mailing supply company. And that her daughter would hold up the tube and say, "Ball, ball, where did you go, ball?" And that was her first sentence, the first time she put together more than 2 words. And I just saw her the other day, and she told me again about how she's never going to forget that. If you go to the next slide, please. This is again another message we got from a mother, and she talked about how that they took cues from our kit to develop some new routines for themselves, since they no longer had a life that was, organized around going to school. And these were activities that came from our Everybody Let's Go Outside kit. So they create a mural together, they go on a nature walk, they collected flowers to put in the little flower press, DIY flower press they gave her. And she ended her message just saying, the kits are a breath of fresh air during a very hard time, and anything that puts a smile on their faces right now is worth its weight in gold. So that's all I had to say today.
Oh, that's so much. It's so much and so wonderful. Kathy, thank you so much for sharing that. And, we're going to bring it into the home stretch now by passing the mic to Dene Mosier, Executive Director of the Kansas Children's Discovery Center. So I'm going to spotlight you.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Deb and Kathy. It's so exciting to be able to share with my Children's Museum colleagues. I'm from the Kansas Children's Discovery Center, located in the capital city of Kansas, Topeka. And like my wonderful and amazing colleagues throughout the field, our museum quickly had to figure out how to pivot. The world changed in March, and we needed to continue to serve children and families. Like many of our colleagues, we created online programming, we distributed learning kits. We were fortunate to receive CARES funding from our county that allowed us to distribute over 3,000 of those. We kept looking at all of our programs. How do we keep serving families? Our facility turned into a school-age program for the children of first responders at our local hospital. Everything changed. The program that we really had to look at and figure out how do we continue to serve is our Play Free program. Laura, you can go to the next slide. This is a program that we had started in 2018, inspired by the Children's Museum of Manhattan. It was a partnership with the women's prison. There's only one women's prison in the state of Kansas, and it happens to be located here in our capital city. And it's a program that allowed us to bring the mothers to our museum on a day we were closed to the public to have a visit with their children. Those visits last all day long. They arrive at 9 in the morning, they have breakfast together, they have lunch. And those days are not structured. They're all about the child leading the way. It's all about play. We have the facility that makes it easy. And we witnessed moms and children bond in a way that they can't anyplace else. They leave the stress at the door. There's so much hugging. They are touch deprived. And so they come to us and the children lead that experience. And it's a beautiful day. The moments when they gather together and the children kiss every inch of their mother's face is heartbreaking and heartwarming at the same time. And so we look at this program and think, what's going to happen? The pandemic is here. COVID has hit the prison so hard. Those numbers were astronomical compared to what was happening in our community. They locked the prison down. And so we stopped and looked at that program. And Laura, if you'll move that next slide. We knew we had already served a lot of families. In those first years, we had almost 300 individuals participate, and 100% of them agreed. This is really, really important for children. We also heard those mothers tell us that those visits changed the way that they behaved daily in the facility, meaning they made their choices based on the opportunity to have this experience to be with their child. We know that families are strengthened when we address the whole family. We can't just think about the parents. We can't think just about the child. So how do we even begin to do this? Laura, if you would take that next one. So we listened. As a museum, that's our first philosophy always. We don't know what families' needs are. We need for them to tell us. Fortunately, we had a great partnership with the women's prison. And so they allowed us to immediately begin asking the women, what's happening? What do you need? They were scared. They were overwhelmed. We were scared. We were overwhelmed. And we knew that these children who were already facing toxic stresses, who already had a huge number of ACEs just by virtue of having an incarcerated parent, were feeling the pandemic even more so. They were the most vulnerable population. We knew that the facility was able to offer Zoom visits, but that's really limited, and the time frame was really limited. We knew the kids needed that connection, and we knew the moms did too. We wanted to continue to strengthen those families. And what we heard from the mothers is, yes, they were getting to have Zoom visits, but it was awkward. They didn't know what to say. By the time they got the conversation going, it was time for it to be over. We can all relate. Nobody really loves the Zoom visits, but it's what we had, and it's what we had to work with. So in getting that feedback from the mothers, we considered, could we just send out our regular learning kits? Could we send these to the kids and they would have something to talk about? And we recognized that's not what they needed from us. So Laura, if you'll move it one more slide, we worked with a child psychologist. I will note that we are a pretty small children's museum. We have about an annual budget of $1 million. We began the pandemic with 16 employees. When we started this program, we were down to 3 full-time employees. This is fully grant funded. So my message is you can do anything if you're keeping families at the center of your work. We created play guides. And we customized the learning kits. So depending on the age of the child, and we gave moms the tips for them to be the expert. We wanted them to be able to guide their child. We gave them tips on I love you rituals. How can you add meaning to a Zoom visit? Well, you can have special hellos and goodbyes. You can have special words that you're sharing. We talked to them about how to kind of prepare and set the stage so that they could continue play from one visit to the next. We then sent that guide along with a book into the facility. So the women were prepared for their visits. They had the guide. We gave them a sheet so they could kind of plan out their visit, come up with, okay, if it stalls and we keep saying, what are you up to? What questions can I ask? How can I facilitate this to go further? We then talked to the custodial caregivers and let them know that that kit would be arriving. And we asked them not to open it until it was time for the visit so that that gift came from the mother to the child. And they went through that experience together. If it was a toddler, they might have gotten a kitchen play set or a tea set, because you know what? The person on the other side doesn't have to have the cup. So we talked to the moms about, how do you pretend play? Can you pour it into their cup through the screen? Of course you can. And for the older kids, we really helped empower the moms to learn about circuit boards, snap circuits, different coding kits, and give them the chance to walk their child through it. Next slide. What we heard from the women is that it gave them a chance to make it meaningful. They found meaning in those visits. It took away that really awkward time. One of the moms said, this was really hard and we both struggled, but they worked through it together. And so they got that opportunity to persevere and really strengthen that bond. One of the things that brought tears to us, the women have been writing us letters, telling us about the experience, telling us about the impact. And in one of the cases, there was a child who is a fourth grader, and she had a virtual science fair within her class. And she shared with her class that this was a project she had done with her mom, and she demonstrated it for the class. The report is she got first place for that. So that child who doesn't get to see her mom got to tell her class that her mom helped her do that. And that ties it right back to, we're not giving them the hugs and kisses that they had on site, but we are giving them those connections. We are building those joyful memories that those children can hold when they are separated, that can provide them some comfort. Our evaluation is ongoing. We actually just had a whole new group sign up, and those are going out this month. Right now, the prison does not have a date for when they will consider in-person visits again. So we will continue it like this. And then the moment we can welcome them back inside the doors, we're going to do that. But we've learned that while this isn't what we desired or the process that we had hoped for, there really is some incredible value here. And it's a different kind of experience. I anticipate if we can find the funding, this will continue even when we resume the in-person. This also gives us an opportunity to work with some of the incarcerated mothers who might be on the maximum security side that currently aren't eligible for the program to come on site to the Discovery Center. And my last slide is just, I have a QR code here. If you scan that with your phone, if you want to learn more about our Play Free program or the Connected Through Play program, you can scan that. You'll be able to see videos of the program as it happens here on site, as well as information about that Connected Through Play. I'm also happy to answer questions at any time, but it's exciting. Play is powerful. This is truly an example of how it can be absolutely transformative for families. And we're excited to be able to continue to offer play. Our museum is open. We're fortunate we have 4.5 acres outside. And so we opened that up last summer, and our indoors has been open for just over a month now. So lots of excitement.
Thank you, Dene. And I am going to bring us all together here. Kathy, you too. To have a little chat in the time that remains to us on the session. So first of all, obviously, I want to say thank you to all of you for bringing your incredible work to this session today. And I'm sure you have some more questions for each other, even though we've talked to each other about these sessions. The stories get richer every time. And I do also want to remind our attendees, use that chat because, you know, we can talk to each other, but we'd love to welcome you into the discussion as well. I have at least one reflection, because it was actually months ago that we were talking about this session, and it feels like every 2 months we are in a different world over the last year. And
Like a
so,
new parent.
yeah,
Like
it's
being
a new paradigm. Yeah.
No
And
parent,
as a
parent every
parent,
2 months.
it's true. Yeah, parent of an infant, right? It's like we're going back there. One of the things that I think really stands out to me, again, as the parent of a young child in our field's demographic, is in all of your stories, actually, is that oftentimes when we talk about play, we're so focused on the child. But what really started to stand out to me in your each of your retellings of your work today in particular is the importance of the support of these interventions for parents to be able to also support their children's happiness and resilience. And so I just like to open that up as perhaps an area of reflection on often as children's museums, we're thinking about the child, and the adult or the caregiver we think of as a supporter. But in some ways, a lot of our work over this past year, the parent and the caregiver has become actually the direct recipient of our work. And so I'd like to ask for some reflections on that from you all. How was that different? Is it making you all think about approaching work in different ways now that we're in this other phase, right, of existence now? And if you'd like to go first, Kathy.
Actually, supporting the parent is half of our mission. That's been written into our mission statement all along, that we provide the enriching educational opportunity play for children while supporting parents. But so we were thinking about them all the time, and we really wanted our kits to not put pressure on parents. We didn't want them to feel, you know, I mean, we were just hearing from the people that had kids that were actually doing virtual school, how horrible it was and what a nightmare it was to feel like they had to stand over their child and make them do these things. So we wanted this to be completely relaxing, and really in our guides tried to emphasize a lot of reassurance and to provide tips of how to do something like sensory play with Insta Snow or whatever in a way that wouldn't drive you crazy. So and you know, and I didn't write it all. You know, we have one member of our committee who's a mom who has, you know, some real good ideas about how to introduce those limits and stuff. And I felt like that was good to just have a real in the trenches sense of what you needed to know.
One of the citations I remember reading a few months ago was that the best indicator of a child's mental health through this pandemic was how the parents were handling everything, how they were managing their own stressors. And so being able to contribute to helping parents find their way through that certainly, you know, benefits the child.
Dene?
Yeah, you know, we saw, again, part of what we've always done is really look at that beginning with the child and moving outward and understanding that we really need to serve the whole family. But we really moved into a different role of serving parents during this time. We even began an online series called Care for Cooped Up Parents, where we brought professionals on to have live interchanges with parents. And our eyes were open pretty quickly at the level of strain and concern that parents were expressing, seeing different behaviors at home, not knowing, was this the pandemic? Was this just being together more? And so making sure that we could really address that from a way to support the parent separate from the child, separate from that relationship, just their own needs. So we did make that shift that we hadn't done before.
Yeah, that's great. I also was struck, just building on that, also, Deb, by some of your comments in your presentation. One, what you're already seeing around behavior, some behavior modification and changes that have happened to some of our children and what they're going to be working through. But that, you know, the power, the healing nature of play. And that was obviously present in all of the programs that you were talking about. But I'd like to spend just a little bit more time on that with you all. In this, this year has put, in some ways, was a great equalizer. Deb, you also mentioned, you know, the really racial reckoning that we've been all a part of in this country. So many things have come to a head in terms of crisis. And in some ways, the pandemic has made all of us feel some of what many families in this country feel all the time. And how that affects health and well-being. And so I would like to open it up. You all are talking about the families that are in need. And so talking about this work is healing work as well, and what you saw and what you're seeing for the future in that as well.
Well, I'll start. Thank you, Laura. We, of course, talk about this frequently, and we generated an entire program called The Healing Power of Play, which really did address and help our community understand that it isn't just our children who need to play together, it's also our adults, and all the lessons that go back to what the kindergarten, everything I learned in kindergarten, you know, with everything that's happened in our country in the last few years. So it feels a privilege and an obligation to overtly work toward bringing play back to everyone. And there's sort of a moment I'm feeling in our attendees. There's deep joy that's happening right now. And so how do we bottle that and keep that coming even 2 months from now when it's not as fresh and new to be able to be together, but to keep finding the love and friendship that that needs to be there to rebuild the social structure, and I shouldn't say rebuild, to build a new social structure across our different visitors and communities.
Thea or Dene?
One observation I would just make about the healing power of play and the difference in what we're seeing in being open. Some of it's beautiful, some of it's concerning. In our first week open, we had a toddler saying, "People, I see people." And so when you really sit and think about what that is like, or our grocery store that used to see a different kind of play, now has children who don't remember ever being inside of a grocery store. So they know about them, but they're having those first experiences here. And so there's that opportunity to kind of bring people together, to have that positivity. But watching it, there's joy and concern simultaneously from a developmental standpoint, and watching parents start to recognize what opportunities perhaps have been missed in this time and how we can step in and fill some of that void.
Kathy?
Well, we have not opened yet, so, but we did see part of why we had actually planned 2 or 3 more kits beyond the last one, the Snowy Day kit. But in March, we were starting to see the demand taper off. It wasn't because people didn't like the kit, because they always got rave reviews, but I think just people's needs were not the same. You know, things became more open. And again, we're in a really beautiful natural area. So as the weather has gotten warmer, families have more opportunities. The playgrounds have been open for a long time. So, you know, that's when we really knew we were ready to start thinking about reopening, and I felt like I was in Sleeping Beauty's castle. The vines were literally growing up over the building and things were looking pretty shabby. And so we've shifted into trying to get ready. And again, we're trying to imagine how people will come back, and we want to create a tone for them that will make them feel very honored and welcomed, and that everything is clean and fresh and new and safe. So that's what we're working on right now.
Thank you.
May I add something? One of the interesting dynamics we're seeing is the whole masking and not masking and vaccination. And I'm really conscious of that. How the adults are handling this together in our space is what the children are observing. So they may have been home all this time, but now they're coming out to a place where we've established very clear expectations. We are having children mask from 3 and older, anyone masked from age 3 and older. And we definitely have all the whole spectrum of beliefs that is coming in and agreeing to that behavior. But the management between those people, and it's not, I don't think it's so different from the inequity and racial conflicts we've seen over time. It actually puts all of us into that. So the lessons of how do we get along when we disagree and when we have different personal experiences, and how do we help our adults through that so that our children really come out of that with additional skills for dealing with that than they might have had before, when their parents maybe only stayed with people they knew or who believed the same.
Yeah.
Do you have an answer for that?
It's the thing I'm most worried about.
Yeah. I think one thing that we have in our favor, I'll just say as the parent of a child who is in person school, is that kids are good rule followers. And they certainly are good at telling adults, like, that's not the rule. That's not the rule. So I think there's an interesting for our older children that have been socialized, understanding what your local community's environment is that they've been navigating in some ways. But I also feel like this is starts to be a philosophy even on childhood. What's your philosophy on childhood and risk and safety?
Right. Yeah. I'm hoping, because we are so small and we're the kind of place where you very quickly, we know everybody's name, that can lead to more accountability and kindness with each other over the risk masking. But it's definitely, I hear all the time that it's gotten nasty in service industries in our community, with especially the tourists that we get Floridians in the summer, and that they, are pretty nasty at the local restaurants and stuff before the masks have been lifted in North Carolina. So we're just going to have to communicate that we're trying to protect this unvaccinated population, the children we're serving, and hope that that all of our high touch warmth can help everybody to cooperate, whether they believe it's essential or not. So
yeah, it's all, again, new territory every time. Managing humans, making choices.
Yeah. Well, we're kind of feeling grateful that we keep on having construction delays, so we're getting pushed back later into July, and which would normally be our busiest month. And I told my board, we're gonna love our out-of-towners next year.
That's right. That's right. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Well, I do want to get to a question that was submitted in the chat, and Dene, this is for you. From Kritika, around hurdles around serving the needs of children and incarcerated caregivers. And you started to talk a little bit about also ways that your thinking is already changing about the Play Free program as we start to move into a post-pandemic world. So if we can spend just a couple of minutes there.
I think probably the most critical piece of this is positive partnership. And so it took some time to build that relationship with the staff at the prison. They already did a great job. They were already progressive. They were already empowering these women. So we were really fortunate in that regard. But we wandered into it, and I had some grand ideas that I was just sure were going to be fabulous. So they were like, no. And so we had to choose which things we thought were really significant and important. One of them to us was that we would have photos, and we would take a photo of the mom with her children. If there were 3 children, we printed 4 copies, and every one of those kids got a photo, and mom got one, and everyone got to take it home because that helps them to secure that memory. And I did a lot of talking about it, not realizing that it was actually something pretty questionable for the facility. The warden agreed to it. The staff came the first time, and I tell the women, and you're all going to take this picture home. And they're crying tears of joy, and the staff is looking at me, and I'm like, oh, it's okay. The warden said we could. So, I've learned a lot about navigating those waters and making sure everybody's on the same page, and I feel good about it. And I think we have to always listen. Like, we just cannot assume that we know what these moms need. The first time we thought that it would be a celebration. So we had donuts in the morning and treats in the afternoon because we wanted them to celebrate. And you know what the moms told us? I only once a quarter get to help my child make decisions about their meals. Give us choices, give us healthy choices. We spend hours cutting fruit and vegetables now. We make sure, but we just had to listen to them. From an obstacle standpoint, certainly there are security pieces, and that looks different. It looks different for programs. There's a program active that's in Chicago, as well as the one at the Children's Museum of Manhattan in New York. Those are with jails. And so jails versus prisons have different rules and restrictions. So actually a prison, because they are longer term there, they have a stronger relationship. And so we have a lot less criteria. We do not have any uniformed officers on site during this visit. So it is a plainclothes event. If you came in, you'd be hard pressed to know it was a different day. From a privacy standpoint, it happens when we are closed to the public. It is a struggle. Everyone wants to come see it, and it's not a sideshow. So unless you are the funder, we don't invite you to come. It's about these children. It's about these families. We want them to feel celebrated, not put on display. So we have been very careful and deliberate. There have been interviews, but those are women who have expressed that desire in advance. So we're really careful about that because it absolutely could be something because people really, really want to be here. As far as post-pandemic, we absolutely intend to bring them right back in, and it will continue to be a whole day. It will continue to be unstructured. It's so important that the children design their day, that they are the architect of the experience. We've made some missteps thinking we want to make it really special. We'll have a pumpkin patch out back because they're coming close to Halloween. And we might do that again, but nothing's going to be scripted. The children just drive that experience. But I do think some of this virtual piece, this connected through play, will remain because there is a whole population at the prison that we aren't serving right now. That is the maximum security side. So if we can work that out, if we can secure funding, I think we have a chance to give those children a chance to connect with their mom in a really meaningful way.
Thank you, Dene.
It's so amazing what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you. Well, we've come to an hour, and I think we're full of inspiration. I will make if there's a final call to our attendees for questions, you can put it in there. But otherwise, I really want to thank all 3 of you for bringing the magic of what you do and what our field does for families through play to our session today. And I hope that for all of our attendees today, that you have received some of that inspiration and confirmation for your own, advancing your own work in advancing play and improving the lives of children and families from these incredible women, incredible institutions, and really exemplary programs. And I'd love to maybe ask you all for a very quick closing reflection on what you're most hopeful for in the coming year for the work that you all do in your museums. So Kathy, maybe I can start with you.
Well, first I want to thank ACM and you, Laura. The weekly calls were a lifeline for me all year, and we probably wouldn't have had the energy to do this without feeling that connection to other children's museums. And I'm hopeful to see children playing here again, and to see what we've really missed is seeing that community building among families, people that don't normally know each other, being supportive and finding common ground. And that's as lovely as the play kits were. That's not something we could address with that. And it's always been the heart of what I think the Playhouse is about. So I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you, Kathy. Who'd like to go next, Deb or Dene?
I can go.
Okay.
I'm hopeful for the joy that we will continue to see, the joy we will continue to create. I'm hopeful that we're all motivated to make sure we have an obligation to provide these play experiences, that we understand the value, that we continue to explain the value. And so for us, that means that this isn't happening inside of our museum walls. It didn't start there, but it's a much more deliberate, intentional understanding that the opportunity gap has widened, and we have an obligation to step in and provide these play experiences that we know heal families, they strengthen families, they serve our communities in a very impactful way.
Thank you, Laura, for hosting this today, and for US Play Coalition. It's been really a pleasure to be a part of a group of people who believe in play and its importance. What I'm really hopeful about is that we have spent our lives as leaders in play and museums creating these places where people of all different backgrounds come together and learn to find joy together and honor children. And I think we're with the disruption of the pandemic, we also sharpened our tools. We did some incredible observing and redesigning and flexing some muscles about how we're going to do things differently. And when you put those two things together, it means sort of, as I said, we are in the right place at the right time to really change our communities, to take what we're hearing, the business community and the university community all saying we need. We're a place where we can make that change happen. So I'm excited about that. And I think every children's museum and every play site that has families coming together, like you said, has the obligation to do everything we can to make sure they know about it and participate.
Thank you. Well, again, thanks to all three of you for being here today and for the incredible work that you do and for your inspirational leadership. Thank you to Stephanie and the team at the Play Coalition for inviting us to be here and share this with you today. And thanks to all of you who've joined us for today's session. It's been a pleasure. And if you want to learn more about children's museums, you can also always visit the ACM website at www.childrensmuseums.org. And we've dropped links to a number of the projects in the chat today for you all to access. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Stephanie.